So you guys are doing pickup soonish?
No, not for a while. Our kids do
Okay.
aftercare, so they're
Oh, good. Okay, perfect.
yeah, and then
Good.
our carpool families could get them today, so we're totally
Okay, good. That's
yeah.
when you can go from like 2 to 4 even, like push back a couple of hours, you get so much more done. It's such a huge
Oh,
difference.
it's amazing, yeah. And
Yeah.
their program goes till 5:30, and they want to stay until the end, and so like they don't want to
Yeah,
come
going
home.
from a mom that's like, "Oh my god, they wanna be home with me," when they're like, "No, I want the aftercare." When my
Yeah, I want my friends.
they would see all the buses come and kids go to aftercare, and they'd be like, "I wanna go." And I'm like, "Do you really?" Like, okay. Moving past that control is interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and just knowing that like it's not just kid jail like it was when we were
Mhm.
kids, where it just felt like it was sad and they were just stuck there and they were in the cafeteria the
Yeah.
whole time. Like it's
Yeah.
very enriching and they play, they're outside the whole time. Like it's a really
Yeah.
it's better for them to be there than here, I think, because they're actually being with their buddies and stuff.
Let me ask you related to this conversation, because our after school program that we were putting the kids in, like our kids don't bring devices home, and now we moved schools. So, but in their old after school program, other kids would have their devices to do homework. And so then what it ended up being is one kid playing a game and them all crowded around watching the device. So how do you deal with that, knowing what you know about the harms?
Well, so for us, it's our kids are in a private school that doesn't have like EdTech mediated learning in it, and so
Really?
all of their
Oh,
stuff, yeah, all of their
good.
stuff is pen and paper the way that it should be.
Oh my gosh.
It's a great school, it's very much trying to cultivate artistic talents and athletic skills and academics. And it's just kind of been doing it the same way for a long time. And so they just avoided the ed tech craze because they avoided every trend and craze.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay.
yeah, so they really make a point to have, there's a lot of structure during the day in the classroom, but then there's a lot of unstructured time after school where the kids are expected to get their homework done. And then
Hmm.
they're able to go do whatever activity they want to do. So they can go typically, play on the playground or
Yeah.
sometimes they're at clubs after school. And so it's a lot of agency for the kids and independence,
Yeah.
even though they're there, at the school facility.
Hmm.
They're still really getting a lot of enrichment.
I love that. Is that a classical style of
It's
education?
not. No, it's not.
Okay.
I mean, it's similar to that, but
Okay.
and that's kind of been one of the challenges with us. 'Cause I'm on the school board too now, and
Yeah.
like we're sort of like a lot of things, but we're not like any one thing, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like we're
Okay.
pretty close to classical, but as that term's used anymore, that tends to have like a Christian component associated with it.
Mm.
And our school is not a Christian school. It's very welcoming, of course, but it's
Mm.
not a
Yeah.
school with any faith lines in it. We're kind of like a
Yeah.
Catholic school, but again, it's not religious.
Uh-huh.
Kind of like a Montessori school, but there's more structure. And so there's a lot of things that we're kind of like, and I like that because it's just made a very robust school for the community. And so we love it. We're
Yeah.
super happy there.
Cool.
Yeah, it's called Kirby Hall School if anybody's in Austin.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to get to with parents. And I'm going to introduce you in a second, but
Sure.
close this out. Like, parents are like, I'm not happy with how the public school or even certain private schools are approaching technology. And so what are my options? And so our kids go to a classical charter school, so we don't have to pay for it. And there is no religious side to it. It's more, but there's like a lot of patriotism and
Hmm.
teaching kids how to be leaders. And so I find that really cool and interesting. Being classical style, it's like a little more strict though,
Hmm.
and very much teacher led, which has been an adjustment from the overwhelmed teacher at the public school. Kids are getting away with all kinds of stuff and chit chatting to like, no, you're sitting and you're getting a blurt card if you blurt out anything, and it's a little more strict. So that's been an interesting transition. But I love that the only tech they're doing is just learning to type, and they're doing that on that paper printout with the keys, and so you know where to place your fingers, and so
Oh,
they're not even
cool.
on device yet in third and fourth grade. So
For sure. And that's really the world that we're trying to bring into being with our work,
yeah,
is that where kids receive explicit instruction in technology long
mhm,
before they're ever expected to use it. A lot like
yeah.
driving a car.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, for listeners who aren't aware, I have Andy Liddell, who you're an attorney advocate for youth digital civil rights. You are a partner, well, you and your wife, Julie, have the EdTech Law Center, which are supporting parents around school tech issues. And I previously interviewed Julie. Listeners may have listened to that one. It's called School Tech Know Your Rights. So, I wanted to build on that discussion today, dig further into EdTech, see what you guys have going on now. So, welcome, Andy.
Well, thanks, Nikki. Really pleased to be here and coming to you live from my kids' playroom. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm very, very pleased to be here and tell you more about our work. A lot's happened since Julie spoke to you last fall that I think
Yeah.
parents really want to be aware of.
Okay, so let's just talk about generally with ed tech, like what is the big deal with it? What are the big problems? What should parents be aware of if you can like go upper level for parents and not too technical here?
Sure. The highest conceptual problem with EdTech is that it's not made for kids, which sounds kind of crazy. But if you trace how Chromebooks and iPads wound up in school, it
Mhm.
was because Google debuted the Chromebook in 2011 and it flopped. It was not a computer that could actually compete with a MacBook or a Windows laptop PC.
Mhm.
And so they had all the stuff they'd been developing forever. And the thesis behind the Chromebook was it's going to be very cheap hardware and everything is going to be online, right? So if you're a young person without a lot of money, then you don't need all the stuff on your desktop. You just need to get to the internet, right?
Mm,
And of course, that serves Google's business model, which we
mhm,
can talk about. But it flopped. It came out to very, very poor reviews, and they had a hard time finding a market fit until they were able to turn around and start getting it in schools under the guise of this 21st century skills. And so if you think about that and how it came to be in schools as compared to everything else that's in schools for kids, where you have textbooks that are written for kids at an age appropriate level, even furniture, chairs that are the size of their bodies,
mm,
bathrooms where they can wash their hands, where the sinks are placed lower.
yeah,
Everything in a school except technology is designed with what kids' bodies and minds and growing selves need. And so, really fundamentally, it's just that simple. Even though kids are using it all day long, even though it's called educational technology, it's fundamentally not designed for them. It's designed for other reasons and to serve other ends.
okay, and we can get into some of that, and you mentioned Chromebooks, so what is the breakdown that you're seeing? Do you feel like it's about 50-50 between Chromebooks in schools and iPads?
It tends to be the iPads go for the younger grades and then Chromebooks go for the older grades. But I haven't really seen much for rhyme or reason, but also frankly, I haven't dug into it on that deep of a level. I know that
Okay,
both are in to a very they've penetrated the market pretty well.
yeah, okay, and are you seeing more harms accessible through one or the other when it comes to the different hardware types?
I wouldn't necessarily say so,
Okay,
because there's just such a vast range of harms, and
mhm,
so, no, not really. I mean, fundamentally, again, another foundational harm is that not only are these things not made for kids,
mhm,
they're always connected to the internet, and the
mm,
internet itself is a harmful place to let a kid just go unsupervised, which is often the case, even though
yeah,
schools do try their best. I think they're well intended.
mhm,
It's just a very difficult task for them to do, and
mhm,
one that really is adverse to the way that most companies make their money now.
yeah, okay. And we can talk more about how they make their money. And I think we could get into all the different digital dangers that our kids are exposed to on school devices, whether it be cyberbullying or inappropriate or violent content, predators, mental health or physical health effects. But I think what I want to focus on today are like the privacy concerns when it comes to data collection and digital surveillance. And so let's talk about data. Like, what data are these companies getting on our kids, and why should we care about that?
Sure thing. Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's no exaggeration to say that it's everything.
Mhm.
And I think people have a really hard time grasping how much of your interaction with a computer or a web browser is recorded and kept for later and used to make decisions about you. And
Yeah.
so I'm drawing for this conversation from several books. One is The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. Another is Means of Control by Byron Tao. And then there's one called Weapons of Math Destruction, MATH,
Yeah.
by Kathy O'Neill. And it talks a lot about how all this works. It's all credible. But the idea is that you're followed around all the time. And information is collected about you through the things you watch, the things you do, where your attention is focused, and all of that's used to create this digital double of you. And that double of you is then sold in some sense to these companies. And how these companies make money is by predicting what you're going to do and then making it come true, right? And
Mm.
so, for example, I love to ski, and we're not going skiing this season. But when I'm bored or whatever, sometimes
Mhm.
I'll go and browse like, what's it like in Austria? And so I was doing this, over the summer, even just thinking about it. And then
Yeah.
wouldn't you know it, ski season hits and I start getting these ads where it's like, I haven't looked at
Mhm.
this stuff in months, but somehow they know that I'm fantasizing about this vacation. And so, a company that knows that about me can then hit me at a vulnerable time, maybe
Mhm.
the first big snow, maybe right after, the holidays and people are feeling flush or before, there's things they can do. And it's all basically trying to get you to do a thing for their benefit. And so sometimes it's fun, like a great vacation offer. A lot of
Yeah.
times it's not, like, your insurance is going up, or, you're not getting a college offer that you may have otherwise earned. And
Right.
so we just don't, the problem is we don't know, but we do know that, these are decisions, and our decisions are being influenced in a
Mhm.
way that they wouldn't be if this information wasn't being collected about us in the first place, right? So these
Okay.
companies are trying to place a thumb on the scale and guide people in different directions. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's a little vague and esoteric, but that is the harm, that essentially your agency is being taken away and you are enabling companies to make decisions about your kid in an environment that's opaque and I think fundamentally unfair.
Mhm. Okay, I wanna give you a scenario that just happened to me last night and this morning and get your opinion. So we watched Spider-Man last night here at our house. And then this morning, we walked into a coffee shop down the street, and there was the TV on, and up pops an ad for the Spider-Man video game. Is there any chance that I thought, like, there's no way that that's connected to the fact that I watched Spider-Man last night, and now my kid's asking me and wanting to play the Spider-Man video game that he saw the ad for. But could my phone have been listening to what we were watching, and then now my phone knows I'm in this like, could it get that detailed?
It's certainly, that would be a dream of a lot of these companies, and
Right.
so I think it's less than that your phone is listening, if that were to happen. So these
Mhm.
phones collect information about everything. Like, all these computers
Yeah.
collect, not just the stuff that you're doing, but information about your computer, the networks you're connected to, the other
Mhm.
devices connected to those networks, and they weave all of these things together into, a pattern of relationships, right? This web of relationships.
Mhm.
Apologies to Spider-Man.
Mhm.
And so, if that were to be possible, what could happen is, yeah, it knows, it is known that you watched
Mhm.
Spider-Man last night, and then you go and you join another network,
Wi-Fi network.
another
Yeah.
Wi-Fi network, right?
Right, which
And
probably
then
happened.
now that you and this other device are on the same network, it thinks that somehow you all are tied together and an ad is shown. I'm not saying this did happen, but that
Right.
is something that's technologically possible and,
Yeah.
something that companies are striving for. It really is. I mean, I think the dream, and these guys gotta learn to read sci-fi, because, like, it's like you
Mhm.
read Minority Report, and it's like, "Oh, I wanna build all the stuff in Minority Report." No, that's not the point of that book. The book is saying, like, "This is all bad." Like,
Yeah.
read to the end. But, if you remember seeing the movie, where, Tom Cruise is walking around and all of these ads are like, they know it's him, right? And
Yeah.
so that's the dream. That's what people want. This world of
Mm.
personalization where, there is no waste, that every ad finds its target.
Mm.
And to do that, there is just this extraordinary surveillance apparatus and ad market that operates in real time, um,
Mhm.
to a degree that is just very, very hard to convey to just, your average person. And frankly, I've been studying this stuff for years. I still don't think I quite appreciate just how vast it is.
Yeah. Okay. And so these EdTech apps that our kids are accessing at school, how are they making money? I know that some are pay, so the school pays a fee or the district pays a fee, but some are free. And so, what's the difference there, and how are they monetizing their efforts in their product?
Sure. So speaking in really broad generalities,
Yeah.
we've all heard the old chestnut. If it's free, then you're the product, right? If you're not paying
Yes.
for it,
Right.
you're the product. But
Mm-hmm.
really, the gloss on that is you're the raw material for
Mm-hmm.
the product, right? And so the product is the predictions about you. And so if companies are offering a free product, it could be a couple things. One, it could be a loss lead where they want to eventually upsell to a paid
Mm-hmm.
product, and there is no data business in them. But just given the nature of the modern internet and the dominance of this business model that
Mm-hmm.
Professor Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
that that is unlikely because most people in the last 20 years think, oh, that's just the internet. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just the water that they're swimming in. They've kind of forgotten that these are all intentional design choices. Everything could be built differently, but there is just a customary way of doing things. And this is how it's been done for a long time. And so any company that's offering something for free would have to make a very intentional decision to break from the mainstream attitudes about
Mm-hmm.
developing products for consumers
Yeah.
with respect to their data collection practices.
Okay. And the paid version, so say like Seesaw, for example, and I recently reached out to them to ask about my children's data, what was collected, where it's been shared. And so far, they direct you back to the school. That request has to come from the school, and then you get very minimal information from the school. But what Seesaw did say was we collect and process student data for that school's educational purpose and for no other commercial purposes. So should I believe that a company like Seesaw is securing my children's data and not sharing it and not selling it?
Well, and so without specifically speaking to Seesaw, but speaking
Sure.
more to that language and that
Yeah.
what they try and do,
Mhm.
essentially these companies operate under the misapprehension that the school is the parent, and they're not. And so what they can say is that, well, the school consents to all of these different uses, and we won't do anything that the school doesn't allow us to do. Well, there's some
Okay.
problems with that legally because typically schools aren't allowed to make those kinds of decisions on behalf of children. But even
Right.
putting that aside, what the school is consenting to is like a browse wrap agreement, a wrap agreement. They're not often they're not negotiating contracts where it's clearly laid out exactly what's being collected and exactly what is being taken and used. It's more that they have the same language that's in any privacy policy now that you go and look at that doesn't really clearly disclose exactly what's being taken. Or if they do, they say we can take everything and do whatever we want with it. And the school says
Mhm.
it's fine and therefore it's fine. And so, again, not speaking specifically to Seesaw, but just generally, that's a
Mhm.
dodge that I think is pretty evasive. And what I've not yet seen is a company come forward and say, we collect no student data, and here's the audit to show it. Here's the
Mhm.
independent audit that we paid for by a completely independent firm that
Right.
shows that we're true to our word. I've never seen
Okay.
that.
They're self-reporting and there's no one checking them.
Yes.
Okay. So the opting in situation. So there's no form given to parents in my experience or anything I've seen to allow us to opt in or out of our students' data being shared. We typically get a one liner saying that they can be, I don't even know if we're agreeing to them using technology in general, but there's no opt in to data sharing. And so schools are effectively then opting in on parents' behalf for data to be shared, and the school isn't even aware, like you said, of what's being shared and what's happening with that data after it's shared. That's not allowed, right? That's not legal? Like, why is that the process, though, if that's not allowed?
I don't know. I can speculate how it came to be, kind of
Okay.
historically.
Yeah.
But The law provides really robust protections for young people's data, especially. Kids
Mhm,
under 13 are covered
mhm.
by COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and then kids' information at school is covered by FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And
Okay.
these are old laws, but they're still good laws, and they provide a baseline, which is most of what happens at school is nobody else's business. And if you're going to release a school record to somebody, that's a big deal. And
Mhm.
I need to know what you know about me, school. So if it's wrong, I can fix it. And if it's going to be used against me somehow, I know how that might be used against me. And so,
Okay.
and FERPA, just for context, came out of the rights revolution of the 70s after a bunch of student radicals were being,
Mhm.
picked on by the government, who was going through and trying to pull all of their college records and stuff for prosecutions and just these unfair retribution against
Mhm.
dissenters. And
Okay.
so that was uncovered, and then FERPA, that was one of the motivators for FERPA.
Okay.
And that applies to education institutions, not to companies. COPPA applies to companies, and it says, with just a handful of super narrow exceptions, none of which involves the school, that to collect information from kids, except for like a very small data set, you have to get parental consent. It has to be verified. And so that
Okay.
means that, it has to be informed and voluntary and from the actual parent. And it has to take place in a non-coercive environment where whatever you're getting out of that deal isn't something you're already entitled to. And so I can see on your face that you're thinking about how this applies to school. And it's like, well, you're thinking that my kid has to be there, so it's not voluntary. They're not telling me what's going on, so it's not informed. The school
Yeah.
is acting as mom and dad, so they're not getting it from the right person. And oh yeah, by the
Mhm.
way, my kid already has a right to be at school. So if all he or she is getting is the right to continue to be at school, that's not really a binding contract that would allow you to take information the way that they are.
No. But schools feel like they are following the law in COPPA and opting in on behalf of parents.
I think that's right, and I think, unfortunately, both COPPA and FERPA, as later interpreted, cannot be enforced by private lawyers, and so it's only federal regulatory agencies, the Department of Education in the case of FERPA, or the Federal Trade Commission in the case of COPPA, or state attorneys general who can bring laws directly under those statutes, and they just haven't been doing that for 25 years, and
Okay.
so you know, I feel like we've been let down in some sense by our public servants. And, all of this stuff has just grown up in the meantime. And I think the the public understanding of how Google makes its money starting in 2002 as compared to what most people's mental image of a computer is and what they think a computer is and does
Mhm.
are worlds apart. And so
Mhm.
I can give you a little bit of a detour that might help make this clear.
Sure.
But so beginning in the late 90s, this has to do with surveillance business model, this idea of persuasive design, which I'm sure you've talked
Okay.
about on your show. But the
Yeah.
idea that a computer can act on your psyche and keep you using a thing, outside of your conscious awareness or more than you would choose to do
Mhm.
if you had just total free choice and these things weren't being used against you, right? That these techniques were not being employed. And so all of this came out of Silicon Valley in the late 90s. And there was a lab called the Persuasive Technology Lab. This guy, BJ Fogg, is there. He's still active. He wrote several
Mm.
textbooks. And it was a radical idea at the time that a computer could persuade you like a person could persuade you, right? And
Mhm.
so he did this very rigorous thinking around what is a computer. And basically, there's three different functions a computer can serve. It can be a tool, which is
Mhm.
something I can just pick up and use,
Right.
and it says something that I choose to do a thing that I want to do.
Right.
It can be media, a way of consuming or transmitting information, or it can be a social actor. It can be something that persuades you and helps change your decision making in a way like a person might, right? And so back in the 90s, computers were mostly tools and had some media component, right?
Mhm.
And then over time, they've graduated or just gradually evolved to being computers are now almost entirely social actors with some media component and very little tool. And so the failure to reckon and appreciate that change, I think, is at the
Mhm.
root of what the problem is and why parents and schools often feel like they're talking past one another, because
Mhm.
it's very easy to say, "Oh, it's 21st century skills. Don't you want your kid to learn a computer?" And the well-informed parent will say, "I do," but they're not learning how to use a computer as a tool when they're just messing around on YouTube or Roblox all day. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
that distinction is very, very important, and
Yeah,
one that I think, most people don't quite appreciate, but we need to really understand.
yeah. Is Fogg still has he, like, flipped the script and is doing more research around, like, social media safety and things like or, like, I've seen his research recently.
Yeah, he's still active, and certainly,
Okay.
he's was interviewed in, another book that I think that we both read. Well, Richard Fried was a guest
Oh,
recently.
that's where I saw him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So he spoke to Richard Fried, and so did, Nir
Okay.
Eyal. And
Yeah.
so, these people are coming out, and, I don't wanna say necessarily blaming the victim, but there is a vast asymmetry of information between what a Silicon Valley behavioral engineer knows and what a seven-year-old kid knows and what their parent knows. And
Yeah.
so it strikes me as radically unfair for people to say, "Oh, well, forewarned is forearmed." It's like, no, no, you actually no one appreciates the degree to which behavioral engineering even exists, much
Mm.
less how effective it is. And
Yeah.
so, I appreciate that these people view their work as neutral, and that these are just things that people should vow not to abuse. But,
We're not given
I
choices.
we're not. Right, right.
Yeah.
And so, this to me bears a striking similarity to cigarettes, right? Where
Mhm.
persuasive design is like nicotine. And
Yeah.
unless people know that, like, doing this stuff is gonna make you addicted to this thing,
Mhm.
um, they're not really able to make good decisions. And
Mm.
again, if you're a normal person thinking about the '90s computer as tool, the idea that it can addict you is very silly.
How addictive do you feel like a school computer is? I mean, would you just compare it to we know that smartphones can become addictive to kids. Is it similar to that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on what
Mhm.
the environment in which it's being used and what you can access on it, right? And
Mhm.
so, um, not to say that they're intentionally making these things gateway drugs for kids in school.
Mhm.
Um, However, if you give a kid access to YouTube all day, well, YouTube is designed to be, habituated, right? Like that.
Yeah.
It has a lot of these persuasive design techniques in it.
Mhm.
I understand that they're not always turned off at school. Maybe they are. That I certainly think that a version of YouTube could be designed, if Google would
Mhm.
want to make it totally cool and good and fine for schools, such that it
Mhm.
functioned like, a DVD library on a shelf.
Yeah.
But that's not what I've seen happen anyway. And so, yeah, I mean, to the extent that your kid can get on the internet, most of the internet
Mhm.
is designed, that's what people want you to do, is to spend as much time on their platform as they can. These
Mhm.
techniques are unregulated, they use them. And so for
Yeah.
sure, a school computer, it's really no different than a phone or anything else, other
Yeah.
than, your kid has it by their side all day long in a way they might not have with their phone.
And a lot of these apps, they're so gamified with points and, avatars and different things that you earn over time, which are addictive features, don't you think?
They are. Yes, they are, and
Yeah.
it's super unfair because the way those things work is they're using your human nature against you, right? And so we do have this drive to compete and this fear of scarcity that's real. And so when you have a leaderboard and also a need for social validation, social inclusion, right? And so when you have a leaderboard showing that, if only you would play whatever math game for 10 minutes longer, then you would be higher achieving. Well, that
Mm.
feels your body experiences that in some way to being threatened with being thrown out of your community. It may
Mm.
not be as quite as visceral and certainly not as conscious, but on a small, slight subconscious level, that's the
Yeah.
experience your body is having. And, when you're almost achieving something, but not quite getting there, that's a
Mhm.
similar thing that your body experiences as scarcity, which is I need to complete this task. I need to go and bring the food in home. And if I can't actually grasp it, if I can't ever actually get there, I'm gonna keep
Mhm.
trying until I do. And
Mhm.
so, that's a little bit reductive, but it's those sorts of things that are at play here that I think
Yeah.
are just so, so unfair.
And when they do finish or earn that last trophy or finish that game, what value do they have then? Like, what are they getting out of that? Have they learned the the content that they were supposed to be learning and that lesson. There's no like intrinsic value. It's just a score or virtual reward, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that the difference between getting attention and holding attention are really, really different. And for you to master something, your attention needs to be held. And so, I compare this to the joy and mastery.
Mhm.
Whereas, if you want to learn to cook a great meal, it's a lot of really boring, repetitive tasks you do over and over and over again. And you can't
Mhm.
really gamify it. But it's like, I love to cook. I learn to cook. And what gets me through sort of the drudgery of that experience is the joy of being able to have created something and to have
Mhm.
mastered this skill that is complicated and hard.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I fear that when we're just constantly rewarding kids with these little quick hits of making
Mhm.
math fun, well, it's like I think math can be really joyful once you figure out,
Mhm.
how it all works and
Yeah.
whatever your subject of choice is. But that's
Right.
something that, once you really deeply understand calculus, for example, it
Mhm.
changes your whole view on the world. And it is
Mhm.
really cool. And it's taken you, 12 years of schooling to get there. Then once you finally get your head around it, it's like, oh wow, it's unveiling this new, layer of reality that
Mhm.
most people don't ever get to see. And that's joyful in a way that you can't gamify. And it's years of hard work and, boredom and perseverance.
Yeah. God, I could talk about the substandard education piece forever. I do want to get back to data, but I want to ask you
Sure.
first about social and emotional learning, which has, in my one of the school board meetings I was at, they were celebrating the fact that SEL got moved onto the iPads, and there's now a EdTech like program or a tech program where kids get assessed. And that's really sensitive information that they're giving over to some external party. So, what are your thoughts about social and emotional learning being on the iPads? Like, do you have thoughts on that?
I think that's extremely dangerous. I think that is an
Yeah.
extremely dangerous thing to have, even at risk of being sucked up into the data economy.
Mhm.
It's the holy grail, because again, if you think about the way these companies make money is by making predictions about you and then
Mhm.
changing your behavior so those predictions come true. Um, Knowing what motivates somebody in childhood, knowing what they're afraid of, knowing what they
Mhm.
like. I mean, that's what psychiatry is. That's what going to a shrink is all about, right? Or a
Mhm.
therapist. And so, unpacking this deep childhood patterns and thoughts. Well, if you're just giving that over to a company, or certainly if you're not taking safeguards to ensure that there's absolutely no way that this ever gets out,
Yeah.
it just feels like they're really, really playing with fire.
Yeah. Okay. That was my instinct. I was looking around like like why is everyone celebrating this? Doesn't it feel wrong in multiple levels? And that sensitive data is really valuable, right? And how secure is it? So let's talk about data insecurity. And there was a huge hack into Power School recently. So can you talk about how secure is it?
Sure. Not secure enough. I mean, I
Yeah.
think if you talk to any data scientist who studies these things, will tell you the safest way to treat your data is to never generate it and collect it in the first place, right?
Mhm.
And so a lot
Right.
of the stuff is generated. It's not even being collected. These companies generate it in the first instance and then collect it
Mhm.
and keep it and use it in all manner of ways. And there's not any public disclosure in enough detail to see how well that's being done. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, as you alluded to, my law firm, EdTech Law Center, filed a lawsuit against Power School in May of 2024 around its data collection practices and retention
Mhm.
practices. And one of the things that we warned about in that complaint was this exact risk of, information about children is super duper sensitive. Records for kids go, and Power School even acknowledged this in its own blog post that an education record for a child in the black market is worth between $250 and $350 by itself, just one.
Wow.
And that's because you can go and open a credit card in a kid's name, and it can be years before they find it out, right? And so, because you got their social security number and all of
Yeah.
their identifying information. And
And
so
hackers got millions of kids' data in this Power School hack, right?
and they did, yeah, and so they
Mm.
got 62 million so far it's been announced publicly, and so all of this information I'm telling you is not, private that we've learned in the lawsuit. This is all publicly reported information in
Yeah.
PowerSchool's own statements. And so, yes, NBC News reported last month that over 62 million student records were taken, spanning over 40 years in some school districts, and over 10 million teacher records were taken. And I think we can all ask ourselves, well, why does this company have records going back 40 years on anybody?
Yeah.
And how could they not keep it safe? And so, it's absolutely a problem that we don't have answers to those questions.
Did they point back to, in the Power School case, just not having multi-factor authentication set up on like an individual's computer? Or did they identify the cause?
They did, yeah. So they've they've had to make some public disclosures, and so my understanding is that yes, it was basically, I forget the hacker term for it, but essentially
Mhm.
where you gain someone's trust or trick them. I don't know if it's directly a phishing operation, but essentially they were able to get an admin password
Okay.
in a way that they shouldn't have gotten, which allowed them to get like master level access to the whole system.
Okay. And so I'm not good at fast math, but how much money could they be making? I mean, billions of dollars off of the kids' data that they stole?
I mean, theoretically, yeah. I think when you have this many records,
Mhm.
it does kind of depress the market. Like if you flood the market with 62 million kids' records,
Mhm.
that's possibly going to drive down the cost of one individual
Sure.
record. And
Okay.
PowerSchool maintains that those records never actually made it out into the market, and that they were able to deal with an intermediary that ensured that this was deleted, and the actor that took it received some money in exchange. That's all been what's been reported publicly. I don't have any
Okay.
reason to doubt that or question
Okay.
that at this point. Um, but time will tell.
What happens next in that breach? So, are they being investigated? Will families whose children's data has been exposed, will they find out anything for sure?
So, if you're affected, your school district should have sent you a letter or an
Yeah.
email, and so that would have happened. And
Mhm.
then, so there's a whole type of law called data breach litigation. And so,
Mhm.
PowerSchool is not the first company to do this. It's a tried and true path, and they'll have insurance for when it happens. And so, the data breach bar jumped into this, and there are
Okay.
dozens of class action lawsuits on file. Disclosure, we're in a couple of them. And
Okay.
so they're going to go to court, and there's going to be a panel of judges that decides exactly how this is going to move through the legal system and where and which law firms are going to run it. That happens next month. But
Okay.
if the short answer is, if you're a family who's been affected, the usual result of breaches like this is that there's an establishment of a fund, and then you can
Mhm.
make claims against that fund. And then, they also have to set up monitoring, which I understand that PowerSchool has already set up credit monitoring. And so the number one best and easiest thing you can do is go set a credit freeze on your kids' social security numbers. That's good practice anyway.
Oh,
With
wow, yeah.
the three major credit reporting agencies, is just
Okay.
set a full credit freeze, and you might have to pay for it, but it's worth it to
Okay.
avoid this kind of stuff.
And if you're a family who did not get an email, but you're concerned about this, what are some questions, or what do you go to your school with to try to avoid this happening to your child?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, question number one is, what are my kids using?
Mhm.
Schools, and certainly in my experience, have had a hard time even answering that question, right? They've had a
Yeah.
hard time quantifying exactly and identifying which platforms kids use during the day. And so that's always a good place to start.
Okay.
I come at this obviously from a very tech skeptical standpoint, at least the way that it's used
Mhm.
in schools. And so I would approach it more from the question of, what are they using, and then why? What is the educational value of this? And then, is this the best way to get that educational result?
Mhm.
And I would argue that most of tech that's used in school today is not the best way to learn whatever they're trying to learn.
Yeah. And you guys have some really great research on your website at edtech.law, but I recently created Tech Safe Learning Coalition, so at techsafelearning.org. Lots more research there. Fair Play just released the Screens and Learning, what is it called? Action Kit? Did I get
Yeah,
it?
yeah. The Screens in Schools Action Kit.
Yeah, there's so many worksheets and research points and all kinds of things for parents. So those are linked on TLC's website, but
Mhm.
also on Fair Play's website. So once you get those responses from the school that are unsatisfactory, I think you go back with research to show them that you disagree or that you feel that there are better ways, safer ways to educate the children. And then what's the ask from there? Like, are most parents gonna eventually end up at a point where they're like, "Well, I don't want them using it at all."
We're seeing this in certain places. You know, it's like we're
Yeah.
seeing this in the districts that were the early adopters of this stuff
Mhm,
are now kind of the early de-adopters. And
mhm,
so a lot of the one-to-one programs were innovated in, I mean, to put a fine point on it, wealthy white flight suburbs. And so,
mhm,
and you see those are the places where people are starting to question and people are starting to ask to have this stuff taken out. And so,
mhm,
you know, the Research Triangle in North Carolina, the wealthy suburbs of Chicago, I've been having conversations with people in these areas who are you know, on the school board or in leadership positions,
mhm,
and they're just beginning to question the narrative a lot more.
mhm.
You know, seeing 13 straight years of declining performance in schools on core
Right.
subjects, you know, that started when one-to-one programs
Mhm.
were introduced. You know,
Yep.
it is just correlation, not causation, but the correlation is pretty strong. And then if you
Mhm.
add that to the poor classroom experience, you know, kids are distracted, teachers are frustrated. There's just not a
Mhm.
lot of great reasons to keep doing what we're doing
Yeah.
just for the vague promise of whatever 21st century skills these companies are offering.
Yeah, so we need that parent pressure. Like, I think we need more parents speaking up and asking these questions. And again, we have templates at techsafelearning.org for what questions to ask. But I think that having the legal pressure through lawsuits that you guys are heading up is really important. And with what's your end goal? Like, if you were to summarize from the lawsuits that you're representing, is it like we need parents to directly be able to opt in and therefore present them with the risks from the front end? Um, is that the goal, or what are you hoping for?
It's a little bit more fundamental even than that. It's the
Okay.
same goal that the lawyers who took on the auto industry back in the 60s and 70s, or the asbestos industry, the tobacco industry, and the opioid industry. Um,
Hmm.
we want these companies that are profiting to not externalize costs onto society.
Hmm.
We want them to pay their own freight and not make their products our problem.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so the world that I want to see, if to take the asbestos comparison, those lawyers weren't advocating to keep kids cold, right? It's like they were advocating for insulation that
Hmm.
didn't give you cancer. The problem
Hmm.
was because asbestos was so abundant and so cheap. Better products could never be developed, products that both were healthier for you and better insulators until
Yeah.
these companies started paying for their own externalized costs in the form of damaging the health of the community, right? And so if you
Hmm.
apply that analogy to technology, everything in school, with some exceptions, but by and large, is supported by this surveillance business model. Well, a
Hmm.
company that sincerely wants to educate kids without selling anything about them can't even get a toehold, right? And so until you clear out this abundant and artificially cheap software, you're never
Hmm.
going to get the stuff that's good for kids. And so, I very much am a believer in technology. I grew up in the days of, the 90s when it was mostly tools and some media. And
Hmm.
I really like all this stuff. And so I don't necessarily want kids to not learn how to use a computer. I think that's really backwards. But
Hmm.
they're not doing that now. It's like when you're messing around on an iPad at school all day, you're not learning anything about how to use a computer as a tool or as a way to create something, right? You're just being habituated to being used by it. And I think
Hmm.
that's a really poor way to spend a life.
Hmm. So you want there to be standards where companies that do business with schools cannot collect children's data, cannot surveil children. And if they do, they will be fined enough to drive them out and bring in more responsible companies.
Ideally, yeah, yeah, and that, I mean, the way all this winds up is that every, industry opposes regulation, and then the lawsuits happen, and then they're desperate for
Mhm.
regulation because at least that's something you can predict, right? And so, again, as with asbestos, once that went out, not only did you see products come in that weren't giving people cancer, they were also much better at doing the thing that asbestos was supposed to do. They're much more efficient insulators, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
so we want to have regulations in place that say these are unfair business practices. You just can't do this. You can't do this to
Mhm.
kids. This is not a thing that we're going to allow anymore. With the ultimate goal of I don't think this should be legal against adults either.
Mhm.
I think that all
Mhm.
of us, this whole idea that by having to participate in modern society, we give
Mhm.
up any of our agency, much less so much of it. I
Yeah.
find really offensive and really undermining of all the good things that technology can be doing for people.
Mhm. Did you read Our Biggest Fight by Frank McCourt?
I haven't yet, no.
Okay. Do you know Frank McCourt, founder of Project Liberty,
Mhm.
who is putting together a bid to buy TikTok, all these things. But his book, Our Biggest Fight, it's a pretty quick read. And it's all about the data economy and us earning our rights back to our own data as as citizens and adults. So highly recommend that read
Put it
for
on my
you. I think
list. Yeah,
it's
that's
really
awesome.
yeah. But when it comes to kids, I guess to close out, like for parents, the current status is that our kids are forced to use technology in almost every school system. And so, what are some asks that parents can make that you think would be somewhat realistic given the current status, that it is very hard to opt out entirely? So, are there things that they can ask for that would help them protect their kids now?
Right, and so I think if you're concerned about this, then step
Hmm.
1 always is find your people, find your team, right?
Hmm.
And so doing this stuff by yourself is, from what I've seen in my years of, activism,
Yeah.
is not a recipe for success. And so
Hmm.
strength in numbers is really important, number 1. Number 2, coming as, an open-hearted partner and not as a critic is really important as well. And
Hmm.
opening with statements about, well, we would all agree that, whatever the statement is, kids should be safe
Yeah.
at school, they shouldn't be exposed to these dangers, and get
Hmm.
people agreeing with you. And then also acknowledge that if this were to be ripped out of school tomorrow, it would be very disruptive.
Hmm.
But also acknowledge that people are being excluded right now. If you think about, any school district that has homeless kids, and guess what? Every one of them does. Those kids are really being disadvantaged by this move to technology because,
Hmm.
if you were a homeless child and wanted your homework back in the old days, you at least had a book and pencil and paper and things that were portable that you could take with you that didn't require any infrastructure. Whereas
Hmm.
now it's like, well, you need a place to charge your laptop and a place with Wi-Fi. And so it's
Hmm.
really hard on the least advantaged people, not to mention that the surveillance economy tends to discriminate the most against the least advantaged people.
Yeah.
Um, and then, consider running for school board, consider getting involved in a more official way. Some districts I've seen, the parents have formed a technology advisory committee, which
Mhm.
has been successful. But I think that the point is gear up for a long, I don't even want to call it a fight, but it is a
Mhm.
fight. But approach it vis-a-vis your school as a long discussion, and one that ultimately we are all on the same side. Schools should be on the side of their communities. They've chosen their communities against social media. They've chosen their
Mhm.
communities in these lawsuits against Juul and other vape companies, and they should choose their communities now.
Yeah.
And then finally, if you want something that's you know easier than all of that is
Mhm.
being a class representative in a lawsuit. And so if there's things you're
Mhm.
particularly concerned about, being a class representative is a relatively low impact way to make a lot of change. And so, it's not nothing. And there are
Mhm.
things that you will have to do to be involved. But when you think
Mhm.
about the many hours required of going to school board meetings and persuading your teachers and all the personal risk that involves, lending your
Mhm.
name to a complaint against a product that you have a problem with, is,
Yeah.
is a pretty easy thing to do. And our firm, just to make it clear, we are a contingency fee firm. So we never charge parents or students or teachers a dime to talk to us. We get paid if we win from the proceeds of our victory. And
Yeah.
so we're a resource. And so I love having these conversations. You might hear my voice going. I've been having them all week. And so
Mhm.
I'm going to go gargle
Mhm.
salt water after this one. But seriously, it's like I want people to reach out and feel like a lot of people, there's a triggering event that's usually something embarrassing and they feel really alone. And it's like their
Mm.
kid looks at porn at school, or their daughter was being roped into a sexual relationship with an adult. Um,
Mhm.
these things that people are instinctively ashamed to talk about. I want people to understand this happens every day, and it shouldn't be something that you suffer with by yourself. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
something that you're just ashamed of, because that only benefits these companies. And so reach out to us. We help. We help with that. We don't just do data. We help with the whole panoply of harms at school.
Mhm.
Our little tagline is, we solve problems where school meets technology, right? And
Mhm.
so we want to help. And I think asking this community too for their help in return. That if you see
Yeah.
this as the threat to childhood that many of us do, and the existential threat to our kids' health and well-being that many of us do, then it really is a pretty small thing to do to participate in a class action lawsuit, and you can make a
Mhm.
world of difference. You can be the one to make cars safer and stop exploding and killing people. You can be the one that prevents
Mhm.
people from dying young of lung cancer and having years with their grandkids again. You can be the
Yeah.
one that prevents people from getting hooked on opiates and dying in the street. You know, that all this happened because people stood up. And so
Mhm.
I would just encourage folks to think about it that way, that this is really, it's a civil rights issue. It's something that sounds scary if you're not a lawyer and aren't in it, but we're
Mhm.
here, we'll protect you. It's not a scary thing to do, and the good you can do in the world is just so immense.
And I too wanna make the point that I don't think you have to have something bad happen to your child on that device in order to make a difference and join a lawsuit, right? I think you had asked me recently, like, "We're just looking for California-based families whose kids use Chromebooks, period." Right?
Exactly.
Like, have them contact us.
Exactly, and that particular, need that basically if you're in California and your kids are using Google products at school, we would like to talk to you. You are gonna be in a position to help, especially.
Mhm.
And right, yeah, I mean, when we reframe it thinking that like, well, bad things are already happening to your kids at school, right? They're already
Yeah.
getting their information taken from them, unlawfully and used against them, and so
Right.
that alone is a harm. But the
Mhm.
galvanizing issue is usually something much more acute, but you're absolutely
Mhm.
right that, just being made to use this at school every day without
Mhm.
understanding what it's taking from you, that is its own type of harm. And so,
Mhm.
parents are coming around to that. It's true and it's real. You
Yeah.
read those books I mentioned, you'll see this. These are acute harms that they're just invisible, in
Mhm.
in a way that
Mhm.
other things are, maybe not be.
Yeah, and I think parents are coming around to understanding that there are harms to it, but we don't know what to do about it. And we do run into roadblocks when we try to contact our school with questions. Like our schools often don't even know all the answers to what we want to know, and then we don't know what to come back with, and it's overwhelming. And so, this is another thing that parents can do to advocate. And whether or not your child has been harmed, you're preventing further harm to your child and harm to all the other children by standing up for what's right and what's safe for our kids at school. And so I will include links to your website and how to contact you and Julie over at edtech.law. And thank you for everything that you guys are doing. I know you're just passionate parents who identified harms and are trying to help make change and help keep kids safe. So I'm really grateful to you and to Julie.
Well, thanks, Nikki. I'm just so pleased to be here and grateful to have you on our side and to be working with you. And so, thanks for all you're doing to support parents. The TechSafe Learning Coalition
Mm.
is an awesome website, amazing resources. Everybody should totally check that out. And yeah, I'll be happy to return anytime to talk to everybody.
Yeah, we will, I'm sure. Hopefully, there won't be any big breaches we need to cover or anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Time will tell.
I know. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Nikki.